Hello everyone. So today we'll be talking about cranial nerves. Today we'll be talking about cranial nerves. Now understand this. Before we go on to the cranial nerves, there is one component of nervous system that I really want you to people to have a very vague knowledge about. Why? Because it's important to understand a little bit of the cranial nerve component, at least four of them. So before that, I'll just explain. So in the previous lecture, if you remember, we discussed about central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. If you remember, central nervous system was nothing but brain and spinal cord, whereas on the other hand, PNS, that is peripheral nervous system, was nothing but everything or every nerve except these two is known as your peripheral nervous system. Now there is a component of central nervous system essentially that is considered another part, or let's say another entity altogether. Why? Because human body functions in two ways. There is something known as voluntary actions, such as lifting your hand, etc., playing cricket, whatever. Whereas there are some functions which are involuntary in action. Involuntary, such as heart, then your intestines, which do peristalsis for moving your food forward. So all these actions, involuntary actions, are controlled by something known as autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. Now, autonomic nervous system is itself divided into two parts: parasympathetic and sympathetic. Parasympathetic and sympathetic. Now, for cranial nerves, the important is parasympathetic one, because there is a synonym of parasympathetic, that is, there is one more name to parasympathetic nervous system. That name is known as craniosacral outflow. Craniosacral outflow. Why it is known as craniosacral outflow? Because the entire body's parasympathetic supply is from cranium and sacral component of the spinal cord. Easy to understand. Parasympathetic is there, sympathetic is there. From entire body's parasympathetic supply comes from only two components: cranium and sacral outflow. Sacral is S2, S3, S4 spinal nerves, whereas cranium component, now this is where the important part comes, which is relevant for us: 3, 7, 9 and 10. These four cranial nerves are important for parasympathetic supply, That is why I give a little brief introduction about autonomic nervous system, so that what we understand from this, that these four cranial nerves will have some form of autonomic component involved in them. These four cranial nerves will have some form of autonomic component involved in them. So there will be their own actions, which can be voluntary, which are under our control, but there will be some form of action these nerves will have to convey that is not under our control but has to be done. What are those actions? We will be discussing in detail in individual cranial nerves and in this brief overview as well. Now, just for knowledge sake, sympathetics, other synonym is known as thoracolumbar outflow. thoracolumbar outflow, which is from T1 to L2 segment of spinal cord. T1 to L2 segment of the spinal cord. That is why it is also known as thoracolumbar outflow. But sympathetic is not that important. Concept is same, that entire body's sympathetic supply comes from T1 to L2. It can go up to head, it can go down to leg, but essentially it comes from T1 to L2. So understand this much as of now. Let's come back. So as we were discussing about cranial nerves, now what are cranial nerves? Why are they important? First of all, everyone should know this. There are 12 cranial nerves. Then all the cranial nerves, they originate from a component of brain known as brain stem. And brain stem itself is made up of three components. It cannot be visualized in a normal brain. We can see, if you look at a cut section, this is a very rough diagram I'm drawing, please don't judge. Then somewhat this structure, which is covered by cerebral hemispheres on either side, cerebral hemisphere, this structure is known as brainstem. This structure is known as brainstem. So all your cranial nerves, I will tell in two exceptions as well, all your cranial nerves, they come from brainstem. So what is brainstem made up of? We have midbrain, the most superior component. Then the middle component is known as pons, and the inferior most component is known as medulla oblongata, if you want to take the full name. This is the most inferior portion. So this is midbrain, this is pons, this is medulla. Now if you divide them equally, which God also did the same thing, so what they did was 4 from here, 4 from here, and 4 from here. Now if you look at it from an evolutionary point of view, this should happen, that it should be an equitable distribution of 4 cranial nerves origin from each of the one of the three components, which is nearly what happened, only except in the case of midbrain. So out of 4, 2 cranial nerves, that is cranial nerve 1 and cranial nerve 2, they are considered to be special cranial nerves. They are considered to be special cranial nerves. Why are they special? Because they are responsible for supplying special senses. What are the special senses? Cranial nerve 1 is known as olfactory. Cranial nerve 2 is known as optic. Olfactory is responsible for smell. Optic is responsible for vision. And since these two are special, they said that we don't want to originate from the same area where the rest of the people are doing. We are special. We'll have our own origin. That's why they originate from a different portion of the brain. Olfactory originates from frontal lobe, whereas optic originates from occipital lobe. Occipital lobe. Frontal lobe is not the most correct answer, but as of now, we just understand that olfactory is from frontal, whereas optic is from occipital lobe. Rest every cranial nerve originates from your brainstem, that is midbrain, pons, medulla. Pons anyways will have 4. Medulla will have also 4. Midbrain is a sad person now. He only has 2 cranial nerves coming out of it. He only has 2 cranial nerves coming out of it. Which one? We'll go in the same sequence as evolution did. So cranial nerve 3, cranial nerve 4. Pons, cranial nerve 5 to, sorry, cranial nerve 5 to 8, whereas medulla 9 to 12. This is how this apply. Now understand a simple concept. This origin, what we have discussed as of now, is strictly restricted to the principal nucleus of the cranial nerve that is we are going to be discussing about. For example, in the case of fifth cranial nerve, there is a nucleus known as mesencephalic nucleus. When we'll discuss fifth cranial nerve, there is a nucleus known as mesencephalic which will have fibers of origin in all the cranial nerves essentially, because it supplies something known as proprioception. So it supplies everywhere, but essentially it is a nucleus of fifth. So there is a simple concept that we need to keep in mind, that even though a new first of all, there is a simple concept that we need to keep in mind. I will say it very simply. A cranial nerve can have more than one nucleus. That nucleus can be in anywhere. It can be midbrain also, it can be in pons also, one more, and it can be in medulla also. Then another component, but the primary nucleus of the cranial nerve will have the same distribution what we have discussed right as of now. That 5th to 8th will have in pons, 9th to 12th will have in medulla only, and 3rd and 4th primary nucleus will be in midbrain. I hope this is what we have understood as of now. Now this discussion will be very much sufficient if you look at from a point of view of content, will be very much sufficient for an undergrad and very much sufficient for an NEET MDS aspirant also. But if you look at from a perspective of a postgraduate resident, this content is almost like a brief overview over all the cranial nerves. This is not going to be the final lecture of cranial nerves for postgraduate resident. For postgraduate resident, I'll be covering each cranial nerve in a separate lecture. Why? Because for a postgraduate resident, it is very important to know what all anatomical variations that can come along with the cranial nerve, what all structures can you encounter along with one of all the cranial nerves, and what will our specialty, that is maxillofacial surgery, can have implication on those cranial nerves or on all those anatomical variations. For example, like neck dissection, we will have to encounter IJV along with spinal accessory along with 11th cranial nerve, and we need to know what all anatomical variations 11th cranial nerve can have. Similarly, if we have, let's say, a nasal fracture and we are operating on a nasal fracture, we should know what all anatomical variations cranial nerve 1, that is olfactory, that we just studied just now, can have. Also, we need to know what all cranial nerves that can get damaged along the way, and what do we need to be careful about. So from a postgraduate perspective, this lecture is going to be a brief overview, whereas from undergraduate and your MDS aspirant, this lecture is very much going to be sufficient for what your preparation will go about. Clinical aspect or applied aspect, I will explain properly. Now let us start. In this lecture, we will be covering about cranial nerve 3, 4, and a little bit weird sequence 6, 3, 4, and 6. Why are we going in this weird order? I will explain. So let us start. Before we start, we should understand what these three cranial nerves are doing, because they have a very similar function. In the most simplest of terms, what do? They have nothing but maintaining or altering the position of your eyeball. So what happens is, this is going to be a very poor diagram of your skull, but please bear with me. This is what somewhat I hope not, your skull looks like. Anyways, we are going to be maximizing on this part. So this is your orbital cavity, which is roughly pyramidal in shape, which is roughly pyramidal in shape. This is your orbital cavity. Now your orbital cavity is roughly pyramidal in shape. These are the four walls. This is your medial wall. This is your floor of orbit. This is your lateral wall, whereas this is your roof. This is your roof. Now what happens is, in the center, you will have your eyeball. In the center, we will have our eyeball. This is our beautiful eyeball. Color it a little bit so that it looks a bit realistic. Anyways, now this eyeball needs to move. As we all know, when we have to gaze onto something or when we have to look diagonally, we move our eyeballs, keeping ourselves in a way, keeping our face as a very straight face, and we move our eyeballs up, down, low, up, down, right, left. So for that similar movement, we need muscle support, which are attached to the walls of your orbit, and they regulate the movement of the eyeball. So for when you look laterally, let us say you imagine your left eye and you want to look left. So your left eye will look left, and that job is done by a muscle known as lateral rectus. So when you are looking left from your left eye, your left lateral rectus will contract and it will pull your eye towards the left side. Very simple action. Similarly, on the floor, you have a muscle known as inferior rectus. What does it do? Very simple action. It will make your eyeball look down. Similarly, on the medial side, you have a muscle. What does it do? Very simple. It makes your eyeball look medially. And roof, you have a very simple muscle known as superior rectus, which will make your eyeball look up. So you have a lateral rectus, which will make your eyeball look outside or outwards. So if you have imagining your right eye, then your right lateral rectus will make you look rightwards. If you are imagining your right eye looking medially, then it is medial rectus. If you're imagining your eyeball looking downwards, it is inferior rectus. And if you're imagining your eye looking upwards, that is superior rectus. Now the thing is, eyeball movement is not this simple as we have just discussed. It involves two separate muscles which are attached in a very complicated way. So I am drawing a very schematic diagram. It is a bit more complex than this. There is a muscle which comes like this in a very weird S shape, and there is one more muscle like this. Since this muscle is above the eyeball, it will be obviously known as superior, and since it is coming obliquely on the way, it is known as superior oblique. It is known as superior oblique. This muscle also, you can imagine the name, inferior to the eyeball, so it's known as inferior. Coming obliquely, it's known as oblique. So this is known. So there are the six muscles of extraocular muscles. Since these muscles are outside the eyeball, they are known as extraocular, and they are muscles which control your eyeball movement. That is why extraocular muscles. So these are your extraocular muscle, rectus 4, oblique 2. So these are the six extraocular muscles that we that control the movement of your eye. That control the movement of your eye. Now note this. This is not the very accurate depiction. This is a sort of a schematic diagram to show how do they control the movement of your eyeball. This is not the exact diagram. Now understand this. Why did we have to know about these extraocular muscles out of nowhere in between cranial nerves? Because your cranial nerves 3, 4 and 6, they are responsible for this movement. They are responsible for the movement of these extraocular muscles. It's because they supply these extraocular muscles. Now we have 6 muscles. How do they supply? It's very easy to remember if you will come back over here. Now most of you, I'm very much sure about this, most of you, you must have had your this chemistry lessons for sure. In chemistry we study about something known as sulfate, which has this formula. So remember this formula. Why do we have to remember this formula? Because this is how the nerve supply goes. Our superior oblique is supplied by the fourth cranial nerve. Is supplied by the fourth cranial nerve. Our superior oblique is supplied by the fourth cranial nerve. So what next? Then if we have remembered one SO4, then we need to remember one more short formula, that is LR6. That is LR6. So I am hoping that most of you would have got it by now. Lateral rectus. So lateral rectus is being supplied by sixth cranial nerve. Lateral rectus is being supplied by sixth cranial nerve. What about the rest? Now you might ask yourself, superior rectus is still there, inferior rectus is still there, medial rectus and inferior oblique. All these 4 muscles, all the 3 rectus plus 1 inferior oblique, they are supplied by third cranial nerve. They are supplied by third cranial nerve. Now there is one more muscle which is not essentially an extraocular muscle, but it lies outside the orbital cavity on the eyelid level. Its name is LPS, levator palpebrae superioris. You can say it's an upper eyelid elevator muscle. It's an upper eyelid elevator muscle, and this muscle is also very happily being supplied by third cranial nerve. So this is going to be your nerve supply. So we'll just brush up. Third cranial nerve supplies your superior rectus. Please, if you are from wherever you are watching this, please say it along with me so that you can get a brief revision of what we just studied. Superior rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus, inferior oblique, LPS. This is the great burden of third cranial nerve to supply these many muscles, whereas these two people, they just got away with supplying one muscle. Fourth, as we all remember, SO4, so superior oblique, whereas sixth, that is your sixth cranial nerve, supplies lateral rectus, the last remaining muscle. And this is the supply of your extraocular muscles by 3 cranial nerves, which we are going to be studying in detail in this lecture today. So now, since we have got this much part about how the muscles are going, wherever they are supplying, let us go through the names of all the cranial nerves before I start. So as I just told, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then you have 8, 9, I'll do over here only, 10, 11, 12. First is known as olfactory, second is known as optic, third is known as oculomotor, whose function we have just read. Fourth is known as trochlear, fifth is known as trigeminal. Sixth is known as abducent. Seventh is known as the most famous facial, and trigeminal is very important for us. Eighth is known as auditory or vestibulocochlear, whichever name you want to call it as. Ninth is known as glossopharyngeal. 10th, named after vagabond, that is Vegas. 11th and 12th. 11th is known as accessory. It has two components, one spinal component, one cranial component. So it's known as accessory simply. There are two components of it, spinal accessory and cranial accessory. And then last, hypoglossal. Hypoglossal. So these are the 12 cranial nerves. Today we are talking about 3, 6, 4 and 6. Why? Because they have similar function. So it will be easy for us to remember, right? Now we'll start with the first cranial nerve, that is third. Third cranial nerve, also known as oculomotor. Also known as oculomotor. Now remember something over here. If you remember just now, before starting of this lecture, we studied about autonomic nervous system. And we read that 3 has some portion of parasympathetic part in it. So that will also come in oculomotor. Remember this. Anyways, we'll start off. So as we remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, where do they originate from? Midbrain. They originate from midbrain. Now we can't draw midbrain over here, but we'll draw the nucleus. And what do you mean by nucleus? If you remember the last lecture, collection of cell bodies of a neuron in brain and spinal cord is known as nucleus. Outside brain and spinal cord, it is known as ganglion. It is known as ganglion. Whereas collection of axons in brain is known as tract or fasciculus. Whereas outside brain and spinal cord, it is known as nerve. We remember it from the last lecture. We just brushed it through just like that. Anyways, moving forward, now you have a nucleus over here. We'll draw a very beautiful nucleus. Okay, no, this is not beautiful at all. It is somewhat like this. Somewhat like this. Nice. This somewhat looks good. Now this is there are obviously we have two eyes, so there will be two nucleus on either side. So the nerve comes like this. Now one nerve we are not going to continue. We are going to continue on one side only. Now remember this, there are two arteries going like this. Just rub one off. In between our third cranial nerve goes. In between these two arteries, my third cranial nerve goes. So the artery above the cranial nerve is posterior cerebral artery. Posterior cerebral artery. Whereas the artery below the cranial nerve is known as superior cerebellar artery. Superior cerebellar artery. Right? But this is not the end of our journey. So third cranial nerve still goes. Now there is a cavity that comes inside your brain. There is a cavity. We'll draw it in dark blue because it will represent it properly. So there is a cavity. Okay, this is not a good diagram. Please don't mind my bad diagrams. I'm trying my best. Okay, yeah, this is somewhat considerable. Now remember this is a very schematic diagram. This is not the most precise diagram as it should be, but I'm just doing it for the sake of making it a bit more understandable for you people. Now we are discussing about the right side. Okay, now this right side nerve is going, and it will just embed into the lateral wall of the structure and come out from the lateral wall on the other side. So what is this structure? This is the famous cavernous sinus. So third cranial nerve goes through what? Goes through lateral wall of cavernous sinus. Third cranial nerve goes through lateral wall of cavernous sinus. Now it will still keep on going. It has a very good path. So it will keep on going till it encounters another structure. And this structure is known as superior orbital fissure. Superior orbital fissure. This structure is known as superior orbital fissure, and through just before it exits the skull through superior orbital fissure, it divides. It divides into two portions. One up, one center. Not essentially center. It is an inferior division, but it gives as soon as it divides into inferior, it gives off a branch in the center, and then it goes down. Now above it goes on to two muscles, superior rectus and levator palpebrae superioris. In the center it supplies medial rectus, and inferiorly it goes to inferior rectus and inferior oblique, and this is how third cranial nerve goes around to supply these things. Now there is a friend of third cranial nerve nucleus. There is a friend of third cranial nerve nucleus. Where is this friend? We'll see. Here is the friend. Here is the friend. This friend says, I will accompany you third cranial nerve, and it goes along with it. Goes along with it, goes along with it. And then it encounters a problem that now there are three divisions. Where should I go? It goes along with the inferior one. It goes along with the inferior one to the inferior oblique and goes down to supply something known as ciliary ganglion. Ciliary ganglion. It goes on to connect to ciliary ganglion. This nucleus, or the friend of third cranial nerve nucleus, is known as Edinger Westphal nucleus. Edinger Westphal nucleus, and this is a parasympathetic nucleus. What we just introduced ourselves in initially, that the third cranial nerve will have a component from the for our parasympathetic nerve supply. This is the same component, Edinger Westphal nucleus. So what is the job of this parasympathetic? It has two jobs. A and L. Accommodation, reflex, and light reflex. So will you people, now you people will ask me, sir, or whatsoever we want to call me as, that if this nerve is going along with third to the inferior oblique and then going to this ganglion, that is also known as short ciliary ganglion. Now if you remember again, if it's known as ganglion, that means it is outside the brain and spinal cord. It is outside the brain and spinal cord, it is known as ganglion, whereas these are called nucleus, so they are inside the brain and spinal cord. Now you people will ask ki, if it is going along with inferior oblique, does it supply inferior oblique? The answer is no, it doesn't. It supplies two muscles known as sphincter pupillae and ciliaris. They supply two muscles, ciliaris and sphincter pupillae, which are responsible for the two reflexes, that is accommodation and light reflex, which are responsible for accommodation and light reflex. So when you get a lot of light in your eye, suddenly it in reflex it contracts. Now see, such a beautiful correlation now we have built upon that they are known as reflex. That means it is not under your control. When suddenly light shines in your eye, let's say you are driving in the middle of the night and suddenly someone puts out those bright lights in the center, bright headlights shine through your eyes, you suddenly the eyelids contract to regulate the amount of light entering into your eye so that it doesn't damage your retina. And this process happens involuntary. So to regulate this process, you have a parasympathetic supply which is regulating, which is through the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which is parasympathetic component of the third cranial nerve, which we introduced initially. So now we understand how this third cranial nerve does its action, which is the motor action over these muscles, which is under our control. You are looking up, you are looking down, you are looking on the medial side of your eye. These actions are under your control. So oculomotor's primary action is motor because it is under your control. Whereas this Edinger-Westphal's action is not under your control, which is regulation of eyeballs, which is regulation of not exactly eyeball, sorry, that is pupil size. That is pupil size. So pupil size up or down is done by these two muscles, sphincter pupillae ciliaris, which do this accommodation light reflex via via short ciliary ganglion, which receives the supplies along with nerve to inferior oblique. That is coming along with the third cranial nerve, coming back originating from Edinger-Westphal, which is a parasympathetic nucleus and friend of third cranial nerve. And that is how we know about third cranial nerve in complete detail. Now we'll go on to fourth cranial nerve. Now we'll go on to fourth cranial nerve. Now fourth cranial nerve is pretty simple. This is your midbrain. Fourth cranial nerve also goes between those two arteries. Fourth cranial nerve also exits through superior orbital fissure. Not the very good diagram, but okay. Fourth cranial nerve also exits through lateral wall. So fourth cranial nerve is almost following the same course or same pattern as the third cranial nerve. But here comes the catch. Here comes the catch because that is what medical science is all about. Okay, we'll draw this in a different color, maybe purple. Okay, purple is fine. Now, fourth cranial nerve, what it does is it travels the same path, but it does a very simple job. It does this. Now you realize what happened. It exits, first of all, it exits from the dorsal side of the brain, so it becomes the only cranial nerve to exit from dorsal aspect of brainstem. This is the first important point. Second, it crosses over. It crosses over. So now you know fourth cranial nerve was supplying your superior oblique. Fourth cranial nerve was supplying your superior oblique. But now what we understand is if I am using my right eye, that means my left superior oblique nucleus is acting. And if I'm using my left eye, that means my right superior oblique nucleus is acting because they have crossed over. So let us look at the right side, but obviously the fibers are coming from left nucleus. So then it almost, as I told, it will carry off in the same path as third cranial nerve. It will exit and it will go down to supply your superior oblique muscle. Simple. But whatever important questions are there, first is which muscle has a contralateral nerve supply? Question comes as which muscle has a contralateral nerve supply? Superior oblique. From trochlear. From where? Opposite side trochlear nucleus, which is located in midbrain and exits through dorsal aspect. This is all about fourth cranial nerve. Now there is some of the exams such as AIMS, MDS exam or PGI or even I don't know. Now it's INICT actually. Now what they do is they have it is essentially a postgraduate concept, but I will just teach it over here. So what happens is sometimes they give question like which muscle has a opposite side nerve supply, which muscle has an opposite side nerve supply. Now we people will think that okay, superior oblique will be an answer and we'll answer. So most of the 99% of the times superior oblique will be there in the options and you that will be the answer, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes they will give options like superior rectus, lateral rectus, medial rectus, inferior rectus. Now question comes, what will you answer? Now question is, what will you answer in this case? So in this case, answer will be any guesses. If you want to guess further, you can pause the video and guess. But the answer is superior rectus. Why? Because in third cranial nerve, especially people notice and some authors have noted, if you zoom into the nucleus, we'll zoom into third cranial nerve nucleus. That's why I drew it in a very specific way. The fibers which were coated or let's say which were tracked back into the nucleus, they showed a phenomena which was this phenomena. This phenomena was happening inside the nucleus, so it is known as intranuclear decussation. Intranuclear decussation. So and these fibers were tracked to supply superior rectus. So that is why some authors say that superior rectus also has a predominant contralateral supply. A predominant opposite or contralateral supply. And this phenomenon is known as intranuclear decussation. Why? Because it takes place within the third cranial nerve nucleus only. This crossing of some fibers takes place within the third cranial nerve nucleus only. So it is known as intranuclear decussation, predominant opposite side supply to superior rectus in the case of third cranial nerve. In the case of third cranial nerve. The rest of the other cranial nerve, muscles being supplied from third have their own intact same side supply only. See, the most of the time superior oblique will be there in answer, but if it's not, then it's superior rectus. I hope everyone, if your people are writing, I hope you people have written by now. You can pause the video, also write. So now we have covered third cranial nerve, we have covered fourth cranial nerve. Now we are covering the last component cranial nerve of today's video, that is sixth cranial nerve, known as abducent. Now if you remember, 1, 2, 3, 4 originated from midbrain, 5, 6, 7, 8 originated from pons, 9, 10, 11, 12 from medulla, as what evolution has told us. 1, 2 said we are special, we are not going to originate from here, so they got out. But 5, 6, 7, 8 retained their origin. So 6th is going to originate from pons. Here it is, small nucleus with the dorsal aspect of pons. It doesn't show any all these special creativity or exiting from dorsal, showing internuclear decussation and all. So sixth is a very simple nerve. It says wherever you tell me to go, I'll go. Say straightforward, simple. So it goes like this, simple. It just comes out and goes. It also has no association with any of the arteries. Instead, what it does is it has association with a cave. So what happens is sixth cranial nerve is kind of protected. Now you will ask from what? The two duras, they essentially form a cave so that sixth cranial nerve can safely travel in it. Dural canal, so that sixth cranial nerve can safely travel in it, and this is known as Dorello's canal. Dorello's canal, also known as dural canal. Also known as dural canal. It is nothing but your dura has folded over itself to create a cave, and this in this cave your sixth cranial nerve travels, so it is known as Dorello's canal or dural canal. Now one more important thing what your sixth cranial nerve does is, now if you remember, third and fourth are going through the lateral wall. See, going through the lateral wall in the cavernous sinus. This also travels through lateral wall of cavernous sinus. But sixth says I'm going to do something different. I'm going to travel through the cavernous sinus. I don't want to go through the walls, but I will go through the cavernous sinus. So it travels through the cavernous sinus. It will also exit through superior orbital fissure, and then, as we have studied, it supplies lateral rectus. It supplies lateral rectus. So this is what is all about third, fourth, sixth cranial nerve. Now, as we are talking about third, fourth, sixth cranial nerve, I already told that this video is going to be all about covering almost all the questions content for MDS aspirants and clearing most of the concepts for undergrad level. Now, if a staff comes and they might ask you about something known as gaze, they might ask you something about gaze. Gaze is nothing but when you are using your eyeballs to look on either side. So let's say if this is your eye and you are looking, let's say this side, this is your nose, this is the right, this is the left. So this is your right eye, this is your left eye, you're looking at right side, this is known as gaze. So nothing special about it. But the phenomena that is behind the gaze is very, if not say I'll say complicated, but a little bit lengthy. A little bit lengthy. So we will look at it, and why it is important we'll get to know. There is a syndrome known as associated with gaze known as MLF syndrome. Known as MLF syndrome. Not MLA but MLF. What is this MLF syndrome? We'll know because it is associated with gaze. And many of the times in case of, let's say, oral maxillofacial traumas and all, you need to realize the difference between MLF syndrome versus third cranial nerve palsy. Third cranial nerve palsy. Because they might almost present with similar features except of one thing, and that difference I will tell you just now why. Now to understand gaze, understand this. We'll draw two eyes so that we'll understand better. We'll go a little down. I think we might have to rub this. I hope people have drawn already. So I'll continue over here. Let's say this is your eye. Let's imagine you people, all people are looking at me and this is me. This is me. And I am looking on my right side. I am looking towards my right side. Okay. Now, if I have to look at my right side, as per your knowledge till now, which muscle should act? My right side. if I'm looking, so my right eye lateral rectus will act. It will pull my eyeball towards this side. But for my left side, my medial rectus will act and it will also pull my eye towards this side, right? So if we look at the situation as of now in front of us, my same side or my right side sixth nerve is acting and my opposite side third cranial nerve is acting. Is it so? And the answer is yes. This is how it happens. So what happens is when I have to look at my right side, my same side sixth cranial nerve gets activated. It sends signal to the muscle it supplies. Ki, bro, we have to look on the right side. Kindly do your respective action. And my right lateral rectus says, okay, we'll just look towards right. And it's very simple, it happens. But at the same time, this sixth cranial nerve also sends signals to third cranial nerve nucleus. It also sends signals to third cranial nerve nucleus. So this is your sixth cranial nerve. When it gets activated, it sends signal to its muscle first. Second, it sends signal to your third cranial nerve nucleus of the opposite side. That bro, we need to look towards the right side. Kindly activate your medial rectus, and it sends signal to the medial rectus, and both of them act together, and we look at right side. So with this concept, can we say that lateral rectus ipsilateral and contralateral medial rectus, they act together as a team. They act together as a team. They have a very complementary relationship. Complementary relationship. So now you people were looking at me, if you remember. I was trying to look at my right direction. My same side sixth cranial nerve told my same side lateral rectus ki bro, right eye lateral rectus ki bro, we have to look right. It turned right. At the same time, it sent signal to the opposite side third cranial nerve. Ki bro, we have to look to right. I've already done my job. Can you kindly do yours? So it also does its job, and my medial rectus gets activated, and I start looking at the right side from the left eye also. But is it this simple? Is it this simple? We will ask ourselves. The answer is no. It is not. The thing is, sixth received its command from a boss, and who is this boss? This boss is someone known as PPRF. PPRF. Who is this PPRF? So this PPRF person of the same side tells ki bro, we have to look towards right. It orders your sixth cranial nerve, and then sixth cranial nerve, as we have already studied, does its jobs. But who is this PPRF person? This PPRF person is known as paramedian pontine reticular formation. Paramedian pontine reticular formation. This is a center which is present above, or let's say towards the side of your brainstem. Paramedian pontine reticular formation. It orders your sixth cranial nerve. Your sixth cranial nerve receives the order, and it will do the same job. So let's say you guys are looking at me. We'll take it from the top. You people are looking at me. I am trying to look at my right side. So for my right side looking, my right lateral and my left medial needs to be activated. So my para PPRS sends signal to right side, PPRS sends signal to my right cranial nerve. This will send signal to the same side lateral rectus and opposite side third cranial nerve, which will send to the opposite side medial rectus. And I'm looking at my right direction, very simply put. So if I have to look at my right side, what do you think my needs to work together? My same side PPRF, same side sixth cranial nerve, and opposite side third cranial nerve needs to be active, and opposite side third cranial nerve needs to be active. Now when this entire enterprise is happening, third cranial nerve feels a bit unfair that only one person on the opposite team and two people on the same team. How is this happening? How is this fair to anyone? So PPRF's boss lies on the opposite side. So PPRF also has a boss, and that boss is on the opposite side, and that boss is on the opposite side. And who is this final boss of the story? And we'll ask ourselves, who is this final boss of our story? And we don't have a pen for this person. Okay. And we will ask ourselves, who is this final boss? This final boss is known as area number 8. Area number 8. So as our concept goes, your cerebrum or your brain is divided into different areas. Areas 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6, 8, 17, 18, so on. So your area number 8 is the final boss, which is in the opposite cerebral hemisphere. This orders your PPRF. Your PPRF orders your sixth. Your sixth sends signals to same side lateral, opposite side third, and your gaze happens. So if you look at this entire thing now, what do you get? So if we look at this entire enterprise as of now, we get, so you people are looking at me. I am trying to look at the right side. We take it from the top. Now I am trying to look at my right side. My right side lateral is acting, left side medial is acting. For left side, right side lateral is acting because of the same side cranial, sixth cranial nerve, and opposite third is acting to the opposite medial. This is receiving orders from the same side PPRF, that is paramedian pontine reticular formation, and PPRF is receiving order from the opposite side area number 8. And this is where the most important structure comes. The fibers which go from area number 8 to supply your PPRF are known as MLF. And if they get damaged, they cause something known as MLF syndrome. MLF syndrome. That is median longitudinal fasciculus. Median longitudinal fasciculus. I hope the concept is clear. I hope the concept is clear. We'll revise it again. I want to look at my right side. Everyone will just imagine this concept on on yourself. It will be very easy to understand. So let's say you want to look at your right. Close your eyes and just imagine this. You want to look at your right. Your left side area number 8 gets activated. It will send fibers to the opposite side, that is your right side PPRF. Your right side PPRF sends signal to your sixth cranial nerve. Your sixth cranial nerve sends to your right eye lateral rectus to look at your right side, and at the same time it sends signals to the third cranial nerve of opposite side to activate its medial rectus, and as a result your both eyes are looking towards the right. As a result, your both of the eyes are looking towards the right now, and this is how it happens. And the structure or the fibers going from area number 8 to your PPRF are known as medial longitudinal fasciculus. Now you might be confused that I told in the initial before starting this concept that there is always a confusion between MLF syndrome